All right, it is 1 minute past the half hour mark. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the Virtual Agent Academy. Let's get started. So before we get started, please take time to visit the Virtual Agent and NLU community. There you can explore best practices, read up-to-date content, and ask our experts questions as well as the community questions to find out answers about your virtual agent and NLU questions. Rely on the experience of others and get your answers. If you're watching on YouTube and you like what you're seeing, feel free to subscribe to our ServiceNow community channel and like this video or leave comments below. So today's topic is expanding your NLU vocabulary for effective virtual agent conversations. I'm Victor Chen, and with us today is also David Van Heusden, who is the outbound product manager for Platform and Now Intelligence. So our goals for today, we are going to go over advanced NLU, and then David's going to go over an exercise on NLU vocabulary sources, and we'll wrap up with Q&A. If you have questions during the meeting or during the demo, feel free to use the Q&A button on your Zoom link. Before we get started, I also wanted to give a shout out. This is a Virtual Agent Academy. We also have a mobile academy on alternating Tuesday mornings or afternoons if you're elsewhere in the world. And then every third Wednesday of the month, every third or fourth Wednesday of the month, we have an HR Academy. So again, please visit the mobile and HR communities for more information, register, and they also have events and webinars just like this. So let's do an overview of NLU and advanced NLU first. So in Quebec, we released an NLU Workbench, which you may be familiar with, that reside in the studio. Well, it's now residing in the platform itself. So it's no longer in studio. And it is a no-code interface that allows you to do NLU model authoring, management, and tuning. You can train, test, and publish NLU models directly in ServiceNow in a no-code environment. In Quebec, we've supported additional languages. We support up to 13 languages now. Previously, we may have supported fewer, but now it's many more languages. You can search for your NLU models as the amount and breadth of your NLU models expand. We have pre-built understanding of software and hardware terminology. We understand that software and hardware, especially for our ITSM customers, is really important for NLU, and we've actually pre-built that for you, so you don't have to define those yourselves. You can build vocabulary from tables or lists. So rather than relying on a lot of manual entry for your utterances and entities, you can rely on vocabulary from your existing data, and that's going to be the main thrust of our exercise today. And finally, you can also have your entity values mapped directly to tables as well. So again, less manual entry when defining entities such as your list entities. Advanced features. So we do have a store release available as of, well, certainly as of April for NLU advanced features. And there you can optimize NLU even further for greater virtual agent experiences for your users. So you have an intent discovery. So that uses ITSM taxonomy, which is something that ServiceNow created based on the past data and experiences of our customers. And we actually cluster your incident data or any other incident related data to recommend what intents and virtual agent topics your organization should implement. So if your organization has a lot of incidents on whether it's VPN, printer issues, email issues, etc., we can recommend what virtual agent topics for you to activate and to use based on that data. We have conflict review. So we understand that, again, as your NLU models and intents expand for your organization, we want to give you tools to find potential conflicts between intents before you go into production. So if you have an utterance that is surfacing more than one intent, we don't want your user to experience that, and our conflict review feature surfaces that for you to resolve. We also have batch testing. That'll give you insights if your NLU ad model is still predicting at peak accuracy. So you're able to upload multiple utterances and test them all at once with the NLU models you have to see what models and intents are succeeding and which are perhaps falling behind. And that, again, allows you to improve and engage and see what intents need tweaking or which models need tweaking. And finally, we do have NLU performance recommendations, and that analyzes your ongoing virtual agent conversations, offers improvement opportunities, and again, makes sure that as your organization moves forward and as it expands your virtual agent capabilities and NLU capabilities, your models and intents hold up, and there are no changes that you, or there may be changes that your organization needs to make sure that you're serving your users and customers the best way. So again, all this is to serve that feedback loop that we want to provide you as guidance. You want to analyze and design, build, operate, and optimize, and then just iterate and make sure that your NLU models are constantly catching up with the growth and the changes of your organization. And we provide those direct, easy, low-code, no-code tools for you to do so. Note that the advanced features I mentioned on this slide do require your Pro or Enterprise license, so ITSM, HR Pro, so on and so forth. So without further ado, I'm gonna switch over to David. He's gonna do an exercise on vocabulary sources. David, feel free to take it away.
Thanks, Victor. I'll be walking you through an exercise where the objective is to create more effective virtual agent conversations. By expanding the vocabulary for NLU using vocabulary sources and mapped entities, it is possible to more easily understand what the user's intent is. You can use this information to skip steps in the conversation, providing a smoother flow for your end users. I'll start by showing the current experience of requesting installation of a new software application. So we have our service portal with our virtual agent, and we have a series of topics that we cover, and one of them is the software related request. If I request that topic, then I'm going to end up in a series of questions and answers what kind of software I would like to do and what do I want to do with that software. In this case, it's install software, update software, or remove software. I choose to install software, and then in the topic we point back to an internal ServiceNow table where we show all the software that we have in the catalog. And that is a list of applications, and in this case you can see that the list grows and grows. So at some point it will be more interesting, unless we want to use the search feature, for example, to have a better way of finding the application. But I can choose zoom and continue the flow. So this is a pretty decent workflow from here. But what if we want to make it a little bit smoother? Well, the first thing that we can do obviously is skip the step of skipping. So I could say something like need to install Zoom. And then if the topic is correctly found, then the next follow-up question is, can you install software, update software? So I still need to start answering the questions from there, but at least I don't have to pick from a list of topics, which could also quickly grow in your enterprise. As said, this is we're looking at software applications here, but you could think of many more items in your environment that could possibly be candidates that you would like to basically capture using within the utterance. All right, so where do we start improving this experience for the end user by, for example, better understanding the utterance in the first place? Let me go back as I end this conversation, and let me show you the list of software applications that is in this environment. So here you can see those 17 items that you just saw in that drop down in the virtual agent as well, or in that list. You can see that we use, let's say, commonly known applications, Blink, Rike, Box, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, etc. So that is just a table, standard table, software catalogs, all active inside the instance. Now, how do we use NLU to improve the experience on the end user side within the flow? Well, as Victor mentioned, right, we now have the new Workbench, which sits in the menu now, has a nice little menu entry, and here you can find all the related features and utilities to that Workbench. So we have the models where you can see all the models with all the languages, and you can use them to basically sort and search through your models. We then have the vocabulary sources, and we'll dive into that in more detail. And then we have some properties related to the NLU Workbench or the applications. And then we have those 4 applications that Victor also mentioned, the NLU model performance, conflict review, batch testing, and intent discovery. So they're all part of the Workbench. So if you type in NLU Workbench and you have activated or installed from the store both the NLU Workbench and the NLU Workbench Advanced Features, then you will get to see all these entries. Before we dive into the vocabulary sources, I want to show you the NLU model that we're using here with that software request, which has a mapped object to the virtual agent topic. This is a nice improvement also in Quebec, where you can now move between the virtual agent topic and the corresponding intent on the NLU side both ways. So both from within the virtual agent topic as from the NLU intent. So that makes, let's say, navigating and administering the whole setup a little easier. If I go into this intent, I have a series of utterances that we use to basically train this intent. And as you can see, I have things like Dropbox, Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, Rike, applications that you saw in that list that I showed earlier. So if I test here, right, need to install Zoom, I'm going to get the prediction and the reason why that topic was also picked earlier in when I had the virtual agent in the service portal. So we can see that the software request has a 97% accuracy. So yeah, that's the reason why it got picked. Nothing weird there. What's important here is that, yes, this is the way to do it, right? We previously had to basically add utterances or update the vocabulary with a lot of the software that we had in our environment, but that was all, let's say, a manual labor. So you would have to create different versions of your utterances, different shapes, and then add the software applications there in order to use them as, for example, list entities that we had prior to Quebec. With Quebec, that is slightly changing, but before we go there, we first want to make sure that we, let's say, use the vocabulary and the capability now with the vocabulary sources to quickly improve the knowledge of the vocabulary from existing information in the instance. Okay, so let's do that. So I type in NLU Workbench, and I go to my vocabulary sources, and I can see that we already have some that are not synced, but I think at first we want to just show you how it works. So let me just point to a table where we create this vocabulary resource to. In this case, I want to map it to that software catalog. So that's the PC software cat item. And then you have to put in a handle, the handle you use inside your utterances to refer to this vocabulary source. So I'm going to name that software app. And then you have to provide a short label. And the short label is also sort of the synonym So be mindful of that as you create that, because that's how it will be, let's sort of replaced when training the model. So whenever it comes across a handle like software app, you could also think about it as replacing that with the short label, so software app. And as you will see that in the version that, or in the vocabulary source that we will be using in the exercise, we will actually be using the full name software application. So be mindful, short label, give it a sensible name that you think that really captures the group that you're referring to, and that will not interfere with, let's say, existing synonyms in your vocabulary. So we choose something that's unique. So as you can imagine, and if you remember that in this software catalog table, all of the names in the display name were called things like Zoom application, WebEx application. That is unique. Those were all unique, and they're very descriptive. And you would want to do so. You want to make sure that your source tables and the columns that you're choosing you're building the vocabulary source on are also built that way. So you might have to do a little bit of data cleansing to make sure that the data that you're pulling from in is unique and descriptive at the same time. In the advanced options, you choose languages. And yes, with NLU, you're creating, let's say, a model and vocabulary resources and all of the artifacts, the vocabulary, per language. So if you have multiple languages in your environment, you're going to create, let's say, artifacts for each and every language. So if you have another language, like French, for example, then you would create also a French NLU model, you would create a French vocabulary resource, and you would create a French vocabulary mapped entity, etc., etc. That is a bit of work, obviously, but it's currently the way to do it with the languages. We're looking at ways of making that easier and less administrative in the future. I just want to make sure that everything is active, so I'm going to set active to true as I enter the query, so that will limit the items. You can just use the normal query builder to reduce the number of, let's say, items that this vocabulary resource refers to. And then we have the refresh. And the refresh is necessary because this NLU vocabulary source cannot remain just inside the instance. The data that it pulls into the NLU model needs to be part of the NLU model. And the reason for that is that at prediction time, you don't want the model to have to reach out back into the instance and do a lookup in a database for a specific entity or a specific vocabulary mapping. So that would significantly increase the prediction times. And that's the reason why we're basically synchronizing the data. And that's also why you have to keep in mind, is this vocabulary resource a table or a field that frequently changes? If so, you might need to change it to some arbitrary time. As you can see, we're not saying you're going to run this every minute, right? That's because that would mean that you're trying to create something on a vocabulary resource that's constantly changing. And that would mean that you have to retrain your NLU models, etc. So that's not going to be a very good practice. So consider this as you build vocabulary sources. Do it on relatively infrequently changing tables and columns. And say then, look, when you could do that every 7 days, and obviously you could say every 7 days, and then you could run it manually. You could basically trigger it also manually. But yeah, just keep that in mind. Fuzzy matching. Fuzzy matching by default is on, which allows slight misspellings and partial matches, which is great, but it also comes at something that you need to be aware of, right? It could mean that, for example, I need to install Zoom, or I need Zoom, would also match Zoom with I need room, because room and zoom are, yeah, not that far apart in terms of characters. So keep that in mind. There are ways to basically deal with that. For example, by just making sure that the utterances that are part of your intent are specific for that intent, and that the intents that are part of your model are not that generic and broad in the sense that you basically try to cover both requesting rooms and requesting zooms in the same model. Because vocabulary sources are restricted to a specific intent or a specific model, but never across multiple models. Okay, having explained all that, let's just save. And because this takes a little bit of time, I'm going to skip a step and I'm just going to go to the already created vocabulary source, which is the software application. And that one basically has the synonym or the short label called software application. So basically wherever we refer to at software application, you could basically replace that with software application. It has the exact same settings otherwise. Okay, now let's look how we use that inside the model. So I mentioned that, right, before we had all these software names inside the utterances. So that's exactly what we need to start changing. So instead of saying install Dropbox, we're going to say install, and then we hit at, and then with at we get a selection of vocabulary sources. In this case we have only one, so I'm going to choose software application and I'm going to hit save. And then I'm going to search through my rest of my utterances to see where else I should be making these changes. And we'll update those accordingly. All right, and then we have two more that need updating. There we go, almost done. And before we can test this, we obviously need to train. So we're going to train this model so that the model is up to date and it has pulled in all that source information from that source table, that vocabulary source table, combined it into the model, and then combined with the utterances in order to make successful predictions. Now the easiest ways to test now is because we already have a published model. We could say something like, I need to install Zoom. And we might get two predictions, one with the trained model predictions and one with the published model predictions. And then we could say something like, hey, I need to install Dropbox. You could pick any of the ones that were in there. I need to install Teamwork. And you can see that although the predictions slightly differ, either above or below, they're all well above the threshold. And the reason why, even without knowing the let's say the vocabulary source and still predictions are in the high 90s, that is because we're doing software requests here. And one addition to in Quebec that we introduced was basically a software vocabulary and hardware vocabulary addition to the vocabulary automatically. So we already know a list of over 200 software applications that we use to train the model for. So that's why the percentages here are already high. If you would use something completely different, like your enterprises meeting rooms, for example, then you would see very different results there. Okay, let's publish. So we're good to go there. So we now have, let's say, successfully trained and published the model with any of the software applications that we might have in our environment. So whenever someone has an utterance which refers to something like, I'd like software application to be installed, right? Remember that synonym. That's going to be a significant, successful prediction. And it can be any of those software applications, right? Also the ones that are less well known. And I think that is the let's say the big differentiator before Quebec and after Quebec with the use of those vocabulary sources. However, it's not the only improvement, right? As I mentioned, if we start now to introduce mapped entities, and mapped entities is actually the replacement of the list entities, then we're going to be able to, let's say, provide that better user experience when in the topic flow, because we're able to predict which software applications the user is referring to, so that we can skip steps in that topic flow. So let's show how to do that. So you basically select the vocabulary source entry, and then you click mapped entity and you say create new entity. And as you can see, we now have this basically grayed out, and it now maps to the source, which is a table or a list, and not the let's say the self-created list of values, which we previously had with what we called the list entity prior to Quebec. We can make it available to the entire model if we want to. So if we have more intents that would use this potentially this software application, then we could check this box. And we use the same map value for the entity. So now that we've done that, we need to basically click all of the utterances where this reference needs to be mapped. So let me just go ahead and do that. And once we're done, we can train again to make sure that the training, and I see that I forgot one. So let me wait until the training finishes and then do that one as well to make sure that we've covered each and every one. Retrain again. And then we'll test the utterance again. So I need to install Zoom. Now, as you can see, we now have a software request, but we also have that entity software application, right? And it refers to Zoom application. And what you can see here, right? It didn't pick the string coming from the utterance. No, what it did is basically it took that display name from the source table and placed that there. And this way, you're actually making sure that you have the same output going into the virtual agent when a prediction is returned. So regardless if people make a mistake or not, you can basically ensure that you have a consistent value returning to the virtual agent. So let's see what happens in our virtual agent environment. So if I go back to the service portal and I start a new conversation, I want to install Zoom. You can see that nothing has changed. And the reason is we did not update the topic yet. So we need to update the topic. So let's make sure that we do so. As I mentioned, we now have an easier way of getting to the topic. So actually I could just click this and it would open up that topic in the Virtual Agent Designer. And I can go to the flow and I can see that in the flow we have that software request, then a decision and whether or not we can install or update. And if we then want to install certain software, we look up at a table. And that table is that software catalog, and that is the one that we want to use because we know that we've just created that software application. I just need to make sure that I publish my model. That's a good one. So what I didn't do, I did do training, but I didn't publish. So the virtual agent never basically doesn't know about unpublished models. So I only trained the model, I did not publish it. So I first have to publish it. Then when I go in to the virtual agent and I refresh my list of intents, go into the flow, go into install software. In my list of entities, I now see my software application. Right? So yes, that is something to be aware of. The topics only look at actual published models, and that's very helpful because sometimes you're tuning your NLU model, and as long as you don't publish your model, you can still test it, but as long as you don't publish it, nothing will change in your production environment. So that is a good to know. I'm not going to enable NLU and input node. I don't want people to basically be able to change the conversation at this point. I don't need to. I just want to skip the confirmation if we're able to identify the software application. So let's publish that. And test again. So I'm going to go and say, okay, install software, and so if we type that same utterance here, so I need to install Zoom, what we can see is that we first have to enter still if we want to install, update, or remove the software. But if we choose install, then the application is automatically selected because in the utterance, Zoom is picked up as an entity. That result or that prediction is being returned to the virtual agent as Zoom application. Within the topic, Zoom application is being used to look up the respective record inside the source table, which is found and automatically selected. And that is a great way of basically reducing the number of, let's say, clicks by your end user or selections by your end user. And there's one more thing that we can do to improve, right? Because we still need to basically pick, install, update, or remove. So can we get rid of that step? Yes, we can. So let me show you that in the final step of this exercise. All right, we're closing this off and we're going to go back into the intent. Within the utterances, we see things like install. So could we use these to basically categorize a utterance in a specific category? And yes, we can. And we use the same mapped entities as I just talked about earlier. But now we use the mapped entity where we have a self-defined choice list. And that basically is the same as we had already prior to Quebec, which was the list entity. So I had pre-created the software action mapped entity based on a list. And the list choices that I made were install software, remove software, and update software. So in this case, we choose install software, and we're going to go through each and every utterance where we see install. That basically is an installation type intent, and we're going to select that utterance, that mapped entity. Then we're going to train the NLU model again and publish so that it becomes available for the virtual agent, and we can then use it inside the topic. So we trained it, we're publishing it. Let's make sure that we test it. I need to install Zoom. And if I do that, I can see that we now match to two entities, not only the software application, but also the software action, in this case, install software. So if we now use software action also in a step in the topic flow, then we have the chance to capture more of the user's intent and automatically skip steps. Okay, in the topic flow, we start with the software request, where we basically look at install software, update software, or remove software. So this is where we're going to use that newly mapped entity. So we select software action from the associated entity. We remove this because we don't need to enable NLU, but we do want to skip confirmation for that recognized entity, so that whenever install software is returned with a prediction, it automatically skips that step and goes right into that decision. Right? That decision is made here on the install, where you can actually see that when a software request is install software, then go down below here into that picker where we have that software application entity. All right, one step left to publish this, and then basically start a new conversation. Type I need to install Zoom, and see that immediately the Zoom application was selected from the backend table, and no need to enter install, update, or remove. This concludes this exercise. So now we'll continue to the remainder of the presentation. What remains is some additional information. So where can you look up relevant, let's say, informational sources in the documentation, obviously, and on our virtual agent and NLU community. It's good to know that Knowledge 21 is right around the corner, and there's going to be a course there which is called Getting Started with the NLU Workbench, which you can then go through each and every exercise. Amongst one is the one with vocabulary sources, but it also touches upon all of the advanced features such as intent discovery and the other advanced features. And then there are some related NLU Academy sessions, getting started with entity recognition and NLU in Quebec, and you can find those in the playlist for the Virtual Agent Academy on YouTube. Having said that, I want to thank you for your presence, and I wish you a very good day, and see you next time.